Hello, Liz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. It's like beautiful weather here today. It's great.
Yeah, how's your stress level?
Yes, let's dive into stress. My stress level today is actually pretty good. We have like childcare covered today. Everything's
Mm.
been on time at work. It's been a pretty, knock on wood, it's been a pretty easy day.
Oh, good, good, good. So I'm glad you're not stressed. I'm not stressed either. So I do have to ask, are we more stressed than ever before? Is this generation, is this time that we're in more stressful than ever before? Don't we have washing machines to do our dirty work and robot vacuums and comfortable IKEA couches? Because when I talk to my parents, they tell me they had to walk to school in the snow uphill both ways. And it seems like we have a lot of creature comforts nowadays.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, there is a lot about life that is safer and less stressful than in the past. So most of us aren't hunting for our food. Most of
Most,
us,
I would hope not. Yeah.
there are probably some of us that are living somewhere in the woods still hunting for food, right? But most of us are not doing that, or at least if we are, we're doing it by choice. Where we have medicines that can cure um, not viruses, bacterial infections. We have all sorts of things that we didn't have in the past, right? So, in many ways, we are not facing the same types of stressors. And because of the way that many people are leading their lives and living their lives, they're under a lot of stress. And it can be more stressful than it was in the past. And we're seeing that people are finding themselves really inundated by it. And the APA did a survey, it's been a couple years now. And what they discovered is that the American public is under so much stress that they have higher depression levels than usual. They're having more relationship issues than usual. So this is having a huge impact. And they used the words, the battered American psyche. So
Mm.
they described it as people feel battered by how much they're facing. I think the difference now is that in the past, we just had our stressors. Like we have to feed ourselves, we have to make sure we don't get sick, and we kind of see these things. Now we're inundated with things. So it's everywhere. We're seeing all of this information constantly. We're being exposed to kind of traumatic scenes constantly. And we're being expected to do a lot more than people have ever been expected to do in the past. And that's a reality. Like, we don't just get one role, we don't just get one or two jobs in life. We're being expected to live up to social media standards, to do great in the workplace, to be great family people. Like, we have a lot of weight on our shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting that basically being super stressed out or like overly stressed isn't its own thing. Like it isn't its own condition, but it obviously is highly correlated with a lot of other conditions. So even just having higher cortisol in your body is going to put you at a greater risk of all sorts of diseases. And as you mentioned, higher stress is correlated with depression and anxiety. Um, do should stress be its own thing that we should like treat almost like a public health issue?
I think so. And I think that people are starting to recognize that, even with the American Psychological Association doing a specific study and survey completely related to stress after COVID. Um, I think that we're seeing it in the way that people are focusing on what's happening with teens. Like, is this just that all the teens are depressed, or is there some sort of underlying stressors that we
Mm-hmm.
need to identify? I work with couples, and what my argument is that when it comes to couples work, especially if you know that your couples are very busy people, they're managing many different roles and expectations in their lives, that stress should be one of the primary things you're treating, instead of keeping it surface level and saying, this is just communication issues, let me teach you how to
Mm.
listen better. There needs to be some really exact language around the reason you're struggling to do this. The reason you're struggling to communicate is because there's so much stress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because you did write in your book that despite all the therapeutic tools in your toolbox that you got from your education, it didn't quite prepare you for the stress that you had in your own relationship. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a couples therapist and I had lots of tools regarding how to communicate well, how to be a good listener, how to say things in a gentle way. I know what to stay away from. I know not to criticize. I know not to yell. I know all of these things. And yet, when my husband and I started to have additional stress in our lives, we were wonderful until baby came along, house payments came along, our jobs became more stressful. Um, until that point, we were fine. But then when the stress came, I actually reacted in ways that were pretty surprising to myself.
Mm,
I wasn't able to say things the gentle way. I wasn't able to express myself without criticism. My husband and I would do things like yell at each other or stomp away from each other. And I know not to do these things. And so when that started to happen in my own marriage, I was like, wait, this has nothing to do with how much you know. This has to do with what is happening between us. And I started to realize what is happening between us physiologically that's impacting our ability to communicate well.
mm. I feel like it's a very common experience. I mean, we want to love our partners. For example, we say that we love them. We maybe even have an intention to go into a conversation and be kind and empathetic and compassionate. But then we get triggered, we get feel wounded, we feel attacked, and suddenly all those intentions get thrown out the window and we find ourselves, as you mentioned, yelling, arguing, stomping our feet. Why does that happen?
I mean, like you said, we all kind of know what we're supposed to do, right? Like there's
Right.
some things we don't totally know and we go to therapy and we learn them and we're like, wow, that's great. I can use this tool. But we know and we love the person and we don't want to be mean and we don't want to abandon them and we do it anyway. And the reason is because when we experience something that feels threatening to us, whether it feels threatening to our attachment system or to wanting to make sure that we get our way, essentially, we start to have stress hormones pumped into our body. And what those stress hormones do is they prepare us to protect ourselves. And preparing to protect ourselves means that we become myopic. Myopic means I'm just focused on my one thing. So if you're
Mm,
doing that, then you're not going to see your partner's perspective. You're not going to be willing to be flexible about negotiating through the best outcome for both of you. It's going to be very much, this is my point. I want you to understand my point, and you've got to listen to me. We also become
mhm,
very self focused. So it's like, how am I feeling right now? What do I want right now? What's my outcome? And we aren't able to see the whole picture. And all of this is happening in our bodies because of those stress hormones. And one of the biggest aha moments when I'm working with couples in the couples therapy room is when you see this stuff start to happen, when you start to raise your voices, when you're not able to laugh about things anymore, when you're not curious
mm,
or being really empathetic, it's probably a sign that your nervous system has been hijacked by this conversation and you're not really going to be able to have the conversation. So instead, take a pause and get your body to calm down first before you do anything else.
mm, mhm, mhm. It's so interesting that you said it's when we experience something that feels threatening. And want to get into that because I think we all are aware of our flight, fright, freeze response. And I think a lot of people do think of that as coming up with physical threats. Like even when we get cut off in traffic, we get so angry, we kind of yell. And I do feel like there's a intuition that stress is different than somebody mugging us with a knife like the general
Mhm.
stress like that we experience. But what I'm hearing from you is there is that connection that even the general stressors in our life do create that physiological response, and even something like criticism, say from our partner, feels threatening.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, although our systems are incredibly smart, right? It's amazing what our bodies can do to keep us alive. It's amazing the way that we can respond to threats when we really need them. Those stress responses are unfortunately the same. So if
Mm,
somebody's cutting me off in traffic, I feel the threat. I might get in a car accident and my body automatically responds to keep me safe. And I need that automatic response. If I don't have the automatic response when someone's about to hit my car and I'm sitting there going, let me be curious. What's that person doing? I'm going to get hit by the car and I'm going to get hurt. So it's very important for our survival in danger that our stress response happens quickly and that it takes away all of that other stuff, that it takes away curiosity and that it takes away anything that wouldn't be helpful to us. The problem is that when we feel a threat and our body goes into a stress state in our relationship, and I'm not talking about a physical threat because obviously if someone's going to hurt you in a relationship, you'd also want to be able to react quickly. But you feel a threat around your feelings, you feel a threat around something that you really want to have happen in a decision you need to make. You feel bombarded by the outside world, so you're already feeling threatened, whatever it is. Your body is still unfortunately doing the same thing. And it makes very split second decisions about how you're going to behave. And again, if you were in that traffic almost accident, you would want it to make the split second decision. But in our relationships, it becomes problematic.
mm, mhm. So far, what I'm hearing from you is that when we do have a stress response, whether it's in conversation or just our life is feeling very, very stressful, it does shut down a lot of our ability to relate. As you mentioned, we get myopic, focused on one thing, and self focused, thus unable to empathize with our partner. And what I'm also hearing from you is that some symptoms that arise in relationship is we're not able to laugh about things or be curious about our partner's experience. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more before we get into how to handle the stress of what stress does do to our relationships and how it might even destroy our relationship.
So I think anyone who's ever been in a really distressed state, whether it's with their partner or with the outside world, a lot of my sessions this week have actually focused on how irritable people are right now because their jobs are really hard or because they're struggling with money or whatever it is. So whatever that stress state is coming from, again, what happens is that you are trying to figure out, how do I deal with this threat, instead of really being able to connect and relate to others. And we start to lose relational skills. When people are in that state, and anyone who's been stressed can relate, it's harder to have a sense of humor. So we start to, people will make a joke and we'll be like, that's not funny, or we won't catch the joke, or we won't laugh about it, or we won't be present
Mm,
enough. It's hard to show curiosity. Curiosity is so important in relationships. But when we're stressed, we're hyper focused, right? So we're not going to ask people, what do you think about that? Or, this is how I took it. Is that how you meant it? We're going to accuse, we're going to assume. We start to lose problem solving abilities because we have that split second reaction where it's, I just need to decide to get out of traffic, versus let me sit down with you and talk to you about other options that we have. When I'm not threatened, I can talk to people. When I'm not threatened, I can work something out that works for us both. And when people are really distressed, they have less sex. When people are distressed with each other, they're in an argument, they're usually not offering each other a hug or holding hands. But affection is so important for a relationship. So we lose our capacity to do these things the more and more distressed we become. And what it signals in the relationship is, I don't care about you, you're not safe with me, all sorts of things that might not actually be true, but that's how the other person is experiencing it.
mm. I love that line. When I'm not threatened, I can talk to people.
I can. You can too. When we're not threatened, we are much better communicators. When we're threatened, we either shut down or we become argumentative or contemptuous or critical. And obviously, that doesn't ever really take us anywhere good.
Hmm. hmm And that's so funny because a silly piece of advice I've heard about having a good sex life is to clean your bedroom. Uh, and the reasoning behind that is you want to be present and attuned and attentive to your partner. And you don't want to be like, oh man, I really got to do that load of laundry over there.
For
So is it?
sure. Or like, oh gosh, like this room just feels so, oh, like it's
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming me and
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel free, right? When we feel overwhelmed and distressed, we don't feel free, um, which for sex is not going to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting to hear from you, like how irritable people are. And think it's really interesting in the survey. Maybe you have your clients do the generalized anxiety disorder survey, and one of the questions on there is, "I find myself becoming easily annoyed or irritable." And I feel like maybe we even sense that sometimes from our partners when we like ask, a seemingly innocuous question like, "Did you take out the garbage?" We just want like some information, and then they might kind of like explode or react in a very
Totally.
like, "Why are you irritating me?" kind of way. So what is that connection between, like, let's say I notice in myself, wow, small things are suddenly really irritating me right now.
Yeah, I mean, likely you're having some sort of stress hormone dump in your body and you're going into fight mode. That's if there's, fight, flight, freeze, that's fight. My son last I was super stressed out last night. I had been with my daughter all day, which I love, but I had tons of work stuff coming in and I finally got a second to do it. And it was just texts, emails, da 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 da. I thought finally I'm going to be able to focus. And my darling little son comes into the room and he's like, Mom, I wanted something else for my snack. Can you da 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 da? I was so irritated by it that I said, I can't believe you're asking me that right now. You know that this is, and I snapped. That had nothing to do with him. If I was in a calm place, if work wasn't overwhelming me, I would have been like, sure, let me come see what's up. Or I would have said, hey, no more snack, time for bed. But I got really frustrated. And it was because of what was happening in my body related to the stress. It wasn't because that's how I usually think or feel, right? And it was my fight reaction. I was having a fight reaction within this stress that I felt like I couldn't manage. And he's such a kid of a therapist. He said, Daddy, I think mommy must be very tired." He was like, because she's having some feelings. Could you help me instead?
Wow.
And I was like, it was great because then it woke me up. I was like, honey, you're right. Mommy's really stressed. That wasn't a nice way to respond. I'll help you now. But it was just so funny how he was like, Daddy.
And how old is he now?
He's going to be 7 in a couple weeks.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
So
some
he's still,
emotional intelligence there.
he has some good emotional intelligence. He does.
Because we're talking about flight, fight, freeze, you have a little analogy in your book around cobras, deers, and possums, and I'm wondering if these are potentially connected.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the same thing. But often I use it with my couples because it helps them to kind of get an image of it a little bit more. And people will usually own it and say, yes, I'm absolutely the cobra. I become super snappy and venomous. And I'm the cobra, right? Like my poor little 7-year-old just wanted help opening chocolate milk or something. And I was like, leave me alone. What's wrong with you? I've worked on it, luckily, because I'm a therapist. But some people are the deer. So these are people where they get frustrated and stressed out and they stomp out. They say, they freeze for a second and then they're like, I'm not taking this anymore. And so in the couples therapy room, what that looks like is someone who literally leaves therapy. They'll say, I can't stay in this room with you anymore. I'm leaving and you can do the session by yourself. At home, it might look like a partner that says, I'm done talking about this, and they, walk off to another room or they leave, or in an extreme, they might even say like, I'm done with this relationship. Then we have the possum, which feels like you're talking to someone who's playing dead. And this is when the person just shuts down We see this in session. It's like stonewalling. You're talking to the person and they might be present with you, but they are completely withdrawn. So there is no activation either way. They're not really stomping out. They're not yelling at you. They're just shut down. And all of these are reactions to the way that our own bodies and our own minds are responding to stress.
Just waiting for this car to come by, go by.
Okay.
I don't know if you could hear that.
I couldn't hear it at all, actually.
Okay, good. Um, so I feel like I need to poke you a little bit because last night you said you snapped because you were so stressed. So,
I
uh,
snapped.
what?
I did. I snapped.
So now I don't feel like we're just stuck. There's nothing we can do about it. We're all stressed. We're all gonna snap at our partners. But surely what can we do now that we are equipped with this knowledge of how bad stress can be for our relationships?
So you just said a huge reality, which is the first step. You have to accept it exists. You have to accept sometimes you are not going to be on your best behavior. That's just reality. Like sometimes the stress you're experiencing goes outside of your ability to tolerate it, right? We call that window of tolerance. And so there will be times where whatever your thing is, you're going to do it. But the job of the person is to figure out, how do I make it so that my reactions aren't as big, right? Last night when I snapped at my son, it wasn't huge and it was very quick. And I
Mm.
very, very quickly recognized what was happening and changed my tune.
Mm.
So as soon as you can recognize, here's what I do, I'm going to work on doing that at a lower degree, a little bit less. And I'm going to work on when I see it, stopping it. That's a huge first step, right? So maybe many years ago, I would have, probably never to a child. I've never really been that triggered by kids, except when I'm, you know, really tired. Maybe I'll say, like, please leave me alone. But maybe to my partner several years ago, when we first had our kid, I would yell at him. Now, when I get upset and snappy, my snappiness is a little bit more like, leave me alone, right? So I'm still in that space, but I know not to go there. But how do we do that? How do we go from recognition to changing how big it gets? And that, of course, has to do with self regulation. So
Mm.
we all can improve, I think, our self regulation toolbox, figuring out what works for me. How can I learn to recognize when I'm getting there? How do I learn to recognize flooding in my own body so that I'm seeing, oh, my heart is racing, or I feel like I just want to punch something, or I feel like I want to run away. That's me being stressed. What do I need to do? I need to breathe. I need to ask for space instead of yelling at the person. I need to take, and we know that it takes at least 20 minutes for this stuff to change. So I need to
Mm.
take 20 minutes so that I can get to a calmer place. Learning what you can do to regulate your stress is a huge part of changing how this is impacting your relationships. So when I see the reality as I'm stressed, how do I regulate it? How do I own that I'm flooded and take steps to calm myself down? The second part of this is being better co regulators together, right? So, what my son did, actually, poor little parentified guy last night, what he did was he co regulated with me because he saw I got a little escalated, the temperature got a little warm, and he said, okay, you're tired. Let me go to something else, right? And just him doing that helped me to be like, okay, I'm seeing this reflected back from a person I care about. I'm going to calm down a little bit. Now with partners, what that looks like is if I did that to my husband being able to say, babe, you've had an exhausting day. There's a lot going on. I totally see that. Like, what do you need? He would stay calm in his own body to help me calm down too. And so when we become good co-regulators, if my husband gets stressed out, I'm not going to go there with him. That's a huge problem for couples. One person gets upset and the other person goes with them. And instead of escalating with, you can be a good co-regulator and say, okay, I'm going to soothe my own body And in doing that, I'm going to respond to this person in a way that's going to help them feel more grounded too. And so that's the second thing. The third thing is looking at the stress and understanding which parts of it, understanding how much stress there is. And I actually tell people, write it all down. Write down the things that stress you out. So, like if my husband and I were doing it, it would be big and small things like the childcare situation, work, getting emails at nighttime, having to deal with, we have a rental property, like having to deal with the rental property, like any of these things, we would write it all down. And then we would talk to each other about which of these things could we probably get rid of somehow. So it's really taking stock of your lives and saying some of this stress is a little self-imposed. Um, do I actually need to be checking my email after 5 o'clock? Like, should I have gone in the other room at the end of a long day and done work? Or could it have waited until the next day? So, on our list, something we might say that we need to work on shedding is believing that we have to hop back up on the computer and saying, we're just not going to do that anymore because it causes a bad night. It might be certain tasks around the house, it might be obligations you signed up for that you can't necessarily do. I was talking to people earlier, and I'll change the story a little bit, but they were arguing because they were very stressed out, but the person had signed up to be the Boy Scout leader. And part of what they were arguing about was that they needed help at nighttime, and one partner was out dealing with the Boy Scout stuff. And something I brought to their attention is like, I know you like the Boy Scout stuff, but it doesn't sound like the two of you actually have room to be Boy Scout leaders right now. So that might be something you have to shed. The second is looking at all of the things that you have on your list and thinking, what can we prevent? So a lot of couples are under a lot of stress because life is chaotic. And so they don't have routines, they don't have rituals. They know that problems are likely going to happen, but they haven't been able to take the time to say, hey, every Saturday we fight. And that is super stressful. But that's because we don't have a plan for how Saturday looks. So we wake up in the morning and I want to clean the house and you want to do this other thing. And then we're arguing with each other. So how can we prevent some of the stuff that stresses us out? Every month we're stressed out because we forgot to pay the bills. And then we spent more money and we didn't think about how this thing gets taken out. How can we prevent getting to that point together? Do we need to come up with some sort of bill paying plan? And then the third is adapting. So adapting means that you just kind of recognize that some of the stressors you can't get rid of, you can't prevent. Life is stressful sometimes. And that is where the self-regulation and co-regulation really comes in. It's like, okay, we've accepted this is here, but how do we regulate ourselves in a way that allows us to face this together so that we're not at each other's throats?
Hmm. I love that. What I'm really hearing from you is that there's basically three factors we can work on. We can work on ourselves, we can work as a relationship, and we can work on our life.
That's perfect. You did a beautiful summary. I'm stealing that from you moving forward.
No problem. No problem. Happy. No, I love that. Working on ourselves, accepting our triggers, figuring out how to make our reactions less, and then working on our self-regulation, seeing ourselves as co-regulating our partner. And then I do love that list of stressors that people have in their lives. And I wouldn't mind talking more about that because at the very beginning of the show, you said the way people are living their lives, there's more stress, which almost implies there's a way for me to live my life that there would be less stress.
Yes.
So, when people are making these lists, are you seeing a lot of similar common things that people can quickly or easily remove from their life,
Mhm.
or other preventive measures that do end up alleviating the burdens of stress?
Yeah. So I want to preface it by saying there are absolutely stressors through no one brought them onto themselves. People get sick, they lose their jobs, all sorts of things. With that being said, there is this other dilemma that people are facing where they are kind of unconsciously bringing more and more and more into their lives, literally and figuratively. And so I work with a lot of couples where it's like, they don't have enough time at the end of the day to even make dinner. And then they'll come in and I'll say, how did the week go? And they're like, oh, it was like really hard because we decided to get a renovation done on the kitchen. And it's like, okay, but you were struggling to even manage the projects you have going right now. So what's going on with that? Or we don't have any money. We're so stressed out about money, but we just signed our kid up for the summer camp. That's amazing. They like go and they stay and it's so expensive for the summer, and we did it because we feel like we have to, but now we're stressed with money. And so I really ask people, even when it's hard, because I think so much of society tells us we should be doing so much of this or that everybody is doing so much, that we forget that we don't actually need to be doing all of these things necessarily. And can you step back from what you're seeing your friends doing or Instagram doing or whatever it is, and actually look at your lives and say, do I need to be super mom? Do I need to be the head of the Girl Scout troop? Do I need to have a more updated house? Do I need to take all of these vacations? Do I need to X, Y, whatever it is? Because if I do these things, is it making my life better or is it making it more stressful and worse? And sometimes that's hard for people to look at because they've convinced themselves, I'm going to be happier when I do more, when I do more hours at work, or when I make my house perfect, or when I, join all of these clubs. But in reality, some of that stuff is causing a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm wondering if this ties into your idea in your book that you call the good enough life.
Yes, it does. So one thing I ask people to think about is like, is it okay for things to be good enough? I think that we've had this huge cultural shift, and really, I do believe a lot of it is social media based, around things needing to be extreme, things needing to be beyond excellence. Like anybody, if you look at the world around you, it makes you think like if you just work harder, you could have a perfect body. If you just spend more money, you could have a perfect house. If you were a better mom, your kids will be so much happier and they're not going to be miserable and go to therapy like we all are, right? There's like all of these messages that there is a way to perfect life. And because of that, we drive ourselves nuts trying to perfect life by spending money and time and energy doing it. And actually, there isn't. Life is really hard and life is also really good. But you have to be willing to have a life that feels good, to accept that it's just good enough. That no matter what you do, there's going to be things that aren't great. There's going to be things that you don't love. There's going to be more that you wish you could do. But if you could accept what makes life good enough, is it good enough what I'm doing right now? Or could I do less to make it good enough? That's when we actually find people being the happiest, right? Or the most, let's not even say happiest, the most content. Because us chasing happiness is also a part of the problem.
That's so interesting. We drive ourselves nuts trying to perfect life.
We do.
And mhm, mhm. And I'm wondering if that does happen a lot of times in the therapy office where a person is driving themselves crazy and they sort of want your help in perfecting their life, right? They're like, oh, I'm unhappy with my job, I don't feel as close to my friends, my relationship has some conflict, and I need all these problems to be solved, and I need your help to solve them.
Yes. And one thing that people struggle with is when I respond to that without allowing that perfectionism, right? Where it's like, but what if this is just hard? Or what if I don't have an answer for that? Or what would it be like if you heard from me that you and your partner might actually always disagree on this, that there might not be any hack on how the two of you can have perfect communication forever, or how there might not be any hack on you both being completely happy with the outcome of this specific thing. What is it like to accept the reality of life, which is a little more nuanced, and that there might not be ways to get to perfection? that's hard because often when people come to therapy, one of the things they are seeking is give me the answer. Give me the answer so that I don't ever suffer. Give me the answer so that we don't ever fight. Give me the answer so that I don't have to compromise or so that I can get my way. And sometimes what the answer is that's actually not going to happen. You're going to have to feel uncomfortable sometimes. But what I can help you with is how do you navigate that in an effective way so that you feel fulfilled and content. But I'm not going to be able to teach you how to make it perfect or to
Hmm.
prevent anything bad from happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We all want the answer, don't we?
All of us.
And as we're kind of winding down, I want to bounce a few ideas off of you. Basically, what I'm hearing from you is life will always be imperfect, and life will always offer some stresses and challenges and pain and loss and sickness and death and different things like that. And I'm curious the role that a relationship can play in being a safe haven from those things. Because I do think it's something that we can absolutely try our best to cultivate with our children. Like, yeah, you might have a bully at school, you might, fail in a class or something. But when you come home, this is a home of unconditional love. And in therapy speak, like you as the parent, you're the secure base that when
Yeah.
things get bad in the world, you are creating that secure base. And I am also wondering about what that safe haven might look like, or if it's possible in our intimate relationships.
Like making that home a secure space. And
Yeah.
a huge part of that is what we talked about already, which is self regulation. So, when you're able to stay in your adult mind around your kids, and your adult mind means that you're not just reacting to everything, you're able to say, you're able to respond, whew, I'm stressed. I need to take a break. I'm upset. I need to navigate that in a way that's not scary or in a way that doesn't abandon. So when we're able to self regulate, our kids feel safe around us, right? Because they know that we aren't just either going to blow up and become that cobra, and that we're not going to be the deer that runs away and abandons them, but that when they come home, their grown-ups are able to be in their grown-up bodies and their grown-up minds. And being in a grown-up body and mind means that you have learned or that you're working to learn how to manage your stress in a pretty good way. It's very important for that. And the same thing with our partners. Like when we're able to self-regulate, we are teaching people, you're safe with me. Now, again, I like to talk about reality. Nobody in the home is always going to be self-regulated. The reality is that people are going to get stressed and to be depleted and to go outside of any sort of skills that they have, and they're not always going to be their best selves. They might stomp off, they might yell. Obviously we want this to be the exception and not the rule, but it will happen. And so then a safe home, a secure home, is one where the other people are able to regulate themselves when that dysregulation is happening so that they can co-regulate with the other person. When we have a chaotic home, somebody gets upset and everybody else goes into their own thing. Well, fine, if you're going to be in a bad mood, then we're just going to leave. Or fine, if you're going to talk like that, then let me tell you everything I don't like about you. But instead, if you have even one person in that home that's able to say, all right, everybody, I think we're all stressed out. Let's all take a breath. You're right. Mom's tired, or, you know, George is tired, or dad's tired, or whatever it is. Let's go. Let's all just take a deep breath. We've got this. How can I help? That creates a secure environment. And then lastly, looking at what you can manage and control in your life creates a secure environment. So partners, children, they do well in homes where there is that structure and that ability to say, what can we truly take on? What can we not take on? What rituals do we use to make our lives feel predictable? And if you're able to do those things, that home feels safe.
Hmm. Hmm. I love this idea of self regulation. And you have been talking a lot about the body and bringing the body into this. And I am also curious if there is a connection between self-care and self-love, because I feel like when a lot of people talk about self-care practices, taking a bubble bath, walking in nature, reading a book, drinking tea, I'm like, huh, these are all very regulating things to do.
Yeah. So self care is super important. If you think about those types of self care, they help to regulate your body, and that's why people like them, right? And some of them sometimes might be dismissed as like, "Ugh, a bubble bath isn't going to change my life." No, it's not. But if your body is feeling really distressed and you lay in warm water for a little bit, you will find that some of that starts to be reduced so that you can at least get into a state where you are more connected to your mind and body again. With that being said, there's those types of things: walks, baths, showers, writing, drawing. Those all help to regulate because they help to let the person finish their stress cycle. But other forms of self care are really important too, which I think goes into this idea of like, what can you shed? Because a huge part of self care actually isn't as sexy as massages and bubble baths. A huge part of self care is saying, I love you, but I can't sign up to mow your grass every week because I'm already under too much water. Or you're a great colleague, but I actually can't take on your work this month while you take your sabbatical because I'll lose my mind. Not that you're going to say that to them that way, but a huge part of self care is recognizing I don't have much more to give, so I'm not going to take anything else on.
I love that. A huge part of self-care essentially is boundaries and saying no.
Boundaries and saying no, really
Mm,
recognizing what the reality is.
mhm, mhm. So, all this talk about relieving stress, I like the idea of just finishing a little early, giving us a little breathing room before the end of the hour. So, I do have to finish by asking a question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
I wish That's a great question. I wish that everyone knew that most of the time, I'm not saying every time, most of the time, your partner really has good intentions. And that unfortunately, the turmoil of life, which could be their history, could be stress that you're experiencing now, um, creates a narrative and creates experiences that don't feel loving. And so, what I really encourage couples to do is to step back and say, what are we actually against here? Because it's not each other. We're against the trauma you experienced when you were a child and how that's playing out now. We're against all this stress and how that's impacting us. And really to work as a united front, because the reality is most people get into partnerships because they love each other, because they want the best for each other. And then life is hard. And so part of loving each other is figuring out how to make life a little easier by being responsive in those moments instead of being reactive.
Hmm. Part of loving each other is figuring out how to make life a little easier. Hmm. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth Earnshaw, aka Liz, author of Till Stress Do Us Part: How to Heal the Number One Issue in Our Relationships. For our listeners who want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
You can find me on my website, which is just my name, elizabeth.earnshaw.com, or on my Instagram at Liz Listens. Those are probably the two easiest places to find me.
Liz listens. Well, I appreciate listening to all of your wonderful, incredible insight and wisdom into this world of relationships. I'm sure all your clients and couples are very lucky to have you. And I appreciate your humanness, revealing your own imperfections, so that we can all live that good enough life. We can all accept our own imperfections in order to see them, learn from them, and grow from them. So thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you.